Just like that? Like, you have to put your face right there. That's it. These will be in the blooper outtakes. Hey everybody, I'm Pastor AJ Hausman, and welcome to Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday, a podcast to dig deeper into aspects of the Bible that get glossed over or totally ignored in most preaching. The Bible has a lot of parts that are racy, uncomfortable, and sometimes downright horrifying. Let's talk about it. So, welcome to episode 4 this week. My guest this week is the Reverend John Deason, who is the pastor at the... I even just practiced
Churches
this.
of the Holy Apostles and St. Stephen.
They're going to be upset at me that I messed that up.
They love you. Nobody gets it right the first time anyways. It's fine.
But it's not the first time? Like, how many times? The church is... the Church is the Holy Apostles.
Of the Holy Apostles
and St. Stephen. So this is 2 churches. It's actually really cool. It's a Lutheran Episcopal ministry, and it's 2 churches that have merged into one church, and they have this messy but beautiful blend of Lutheran and Episcopal stuff. And as someone who's currently serving a Lutheran congregation and an Episcopal congregation, I think about it a lot of like, oh my gosh, how do you put these together?
Yeah.
Because I think people think, well, Lutherans and Episcopals are like, and this is what I was told too, until I learned more about the Episcopalian Church. Everyone's like, oh, they're like the same. And I was like, where? Right? Like, it's, I think on like a grand theological scale. Like, if you're looking at the theological big picture, they've got that stuff together.
Well, also, if you compare us to our other closest ecclesiastical neighbors, we're the closest.
Oh, that's
together.
Probably fair. Right. Who would that even be?
That's not this podcast.
we shouldn't dig too deep into that. I also want to call out that remember a couple weeks ago when we were talking with Deacon Julie Stecker, and we were talking about that she preached on the Doubting Thomas gospel.
The greatest gospel in lectionary.
At someone's ordination. It was this guy's ordination service, so. Which felt to me like a strange text for an ordination, but then I planned my own ordination and realized that was literally one of the options that they gave you, and I was like, oh, that's interesting.
Oh, I didn't even know it was in the options.
Well, it's fine. I didn't pick any of the options. That's the thing, too, is they're all optional. I'm like, no, I'm going to opt to not pick any of those. Right.
It just, for me, has been a guiding text, so that's why I chose it.
And you're really into the Gospel of John.
I am.
Say why.
I'm really into the Gospel of John.
We're gonna talk some more about the Gospel of John, but like, why are you're into the Gospel of John?
In your first podcast a few episodes ago, you talked with Deacon Julie about how you tried to take a Gospel of John class in seminary, and weren't able to. I was in that class, and it was with a visiting professor from Luther Seminary, the Reverend Dr. Caroline Lewis, who I'm a little bit of a fanboy of. I love everything she does.
I don't think you're alone in that, though. So.
Oh no, I'm definitely not alone. I'm not even the head of the fan club. But in that, it was an intensive class, and in that week of discussing preaching these texts from John, I changed my mind about the text and about how I feel about it, and I already loved the Thomas text because that, like I said, is formative to my own theological journey, but the rest of it was just like, it's the gospel and it's good, but not my favorite. And I wouldn't say it's my favorite, but it's not my least favorite anymore. I really love it.
That's fair.
So
not mine either. So I actually really like the things about the Gospel of John I like is I do like the poetic language, like the literary, as you talked about, the literary sense of it. Like, it's in that aspect, like, it's just really beautiful. But sometimes, as we're probably going to get into a little bit, those beautiful literary things that the author of John does can become very problematic in how Christians may use them.
Yeah.
And I do specifically say use because I think any time that you take the Bible out of its context, you're using it.
Yeah, use, and I think it even is fair to say how often this text gets abused.
Yes.
Right? How the fourth gospel gets abused.
A lot.
Gets picked out. Right, and we're going to talk about some of that.
So this also podcast right here is the very first one that I'm recording in person with the second human being. And, I just want to say thanks be to God for vaccines. And that John and I live only a few blocks apart, have worked very, very closely together through this entire pandemic, especially at the beginning with kind of having no idea what to do, and the two of us kind of linked together, forced our churches to come together.
Right, we didn't give them a choice.
We did not give them a choice. It said, listen, we need each other in order to make this possible. To do this digital church thing. So for how closely that we've worked together over the past year to this is the first time.
This is the first time we've ever been in a room together to do work.
In a year.
In that time.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's crazy. So anyways, we're in John's basement, and this is Casey. Can Casey sit on the couch?
She can.
Do you want to come sit on the couch? Nope, she's not. She's out.
She's like, now
This is not what I wanted?
So if you're only listening to this, Casey is a 45-pound full mutt. We just call her brown dog, but she is also thinks she's a lap dog sometimes. So
we have a 45-pound lap dog as well. She also doesn't understand why we're doing something that she's not involved in. I want to acknowledge if you have listened to the podcast and you're like, wow, AJ is so loud and clear and her guests are not. Part of the problem is that one, I have a nice microphone, which is really helpful. Thank you to my parents for getting it to me for Christmas a couple years ago. But mostly it has to do with the fact that, I am a really, really loud.
And apparently today I'm not loud enough. We thought it was going to be so much better with us being in
I did, in the same person, using the same microphone.
All the other ones were...
on Zoom. Equipment. Right, and so, it was balancing a person's Zoom quality and their microphone, whether it's a computer or professional, and the internet,
and
all
the
of that.
And
all of those things. And so we're in the same room, utilizing no internet actually for this whatsoever.
No, it's just, we're totally...
Yeah. I'm still just so loud. I don't think that my parents will listen to this, but if they are, I feel confident they're not. But if they did, they'd be like, oh, yeah, we could have told you that.
We already knew that.
Anyways, to the Gospel of John. But first, I want to say... Oh, wait. No, I'm going to say that later.
Okay.
So I'm not going to say it. I'm going to read right now. For those churches that follow the Revised Common Lectionary, for the Sunday, May 2nd, the Gospel lesson will be from the Gospel of John, chapter 15, verses 1 to 8. Jesus said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit, he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine. You are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit. Because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. For my Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
So the thing about this gospel lesson, that needs to be understood, right, to put it in its context, but then also is really hard for where we're at, we're in the time after Easter, right? It's exciting. Jesus is risen, all of that good happy jazz and Easter eggs and alleluias. That this actually comes from hours before he's condemned to death. So this is part of a really long sermon, whatever you want to call it, that Jesus gives at the Last Supper. So in chapter 13, he washes the disciples' feet and they're like, WTF Jesus. And then he gives this, like, ridiculously long speech that's, like, close to 3 whole chapters long. And then ends in this prayer, and then at the beginning of chapter 18 is when he goes out to the garden in the Gospel of John and is, arrested. So it's needs to be understood in the context of, like, they're at the Last Supper. Mm-hmm. Jesus knows that he's about to die, right? And so he's...
Well, even though
but they don't.
They've been told, but they don't.
Yeah. But that he's giving, he's trying to get this, like, message across to them. Mm-hmm. And part of that's a struggle with me with, like, the thing about, we've talked about the Revised Common Lectionary is a 3-year cycle of Bible readings, but it's not reading the whole Bible in 3 years. The other part about it is it's not reading the Bible in, like, order, right? Like, that's something that I struggle with. Like, I'm a person that, like, I won't watch a TV show starting at episode 2, starting season 2, starting in the middle of anything, like, season 1, episode 1. Like, even some of the shows that are, like, I don't know, like Law and Order, like, you could really pick up anywhere. Disagree. Season 1, episode 1. And so, like, the lectionary just, like, goes like this sometimes, and I'm like, I just can't. I realize if you're listening, you didn't hear my spastic hand movements happening, as that's what it looks like. And that's...
Yeah, it's like buckshot. It sort of is like, whatever, like, let's just throw it all up there and... Like,
and so that's a problem with me sometimes. I also want to acknowledge that I'm just complaining, and that I don't have a better system. I don't have any good solutions to this problem.
I don't want to come up with a solution to this problem.
Do you bask in the chaos?
I will bask in the chaos. I will also complain.
Okay.
But so having been raised in a Pentecostal evangelical upbringing, the structure that the lectionary brings, and particularly for a preacher, like you said, that you don't have to, like, every week think about.
Oh yeah, or that's why I don't have to pick out of thin air what the topic is going to be. It's already.
I really love that kind of structure, and to be able to say, okay. And then also the freedom to be like, I hate this week's readings, and I don't want to read them. But the lecture as a whole is far better than the parts that I'm mad about.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I get mad at it too a little bit, but I think I get mad at the things that are left out. Like last week, we talked about the Psalms. And about, like, most of the Psalms are not included in the Revised Common Lectionary. Yeah. So there's just a good chunk of it we don't hear. Yeah. So when people hear Psalms, they're like, praise, whatever. And it's like, most of the Psalms are not like that. Most of the Psalms are lament Psalms. Yeah. They're crying to God. They're mad at God. They're mad at the world and going to God. Like, it's just a lot of...
David saying, I don't have a pot to piss in.
Yeah. Right. Well, we don't include that in the lectionary for some reason. I don't know why, but... So it's things like that, like, I think I struggle with the lectionary a little bit.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Because part of it, too, as you acknowledge churches that don't follow this system, they maybe branch out and use those things. And so then churches that generally rely on this system, we, including, like, myself, I grew up in this system, there's a lot of parts of the Bible that, like, I just never heard.
Right.
And didn't know about until I went to seminary, and I was like, oh my goodness,
Yeah.
And that's maybe something that I struggle with. Also, maybe why we're doing a podcast, though, so, we'll get there.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of both. I think that, like I said, the structure and the, like, guide that it gives. I'm a big liturgical calendar nerd, so, like, I'm really into the cycle of the liturgical calendar, candle.
The liturgical candle?
Candle. The liturgical calendar. And how that sort of offers the structure and walks us through this cycle. I think that's really great. And then the times that I'm frustrated with it, I think about how much I love the other things. So, and in fact, when I left my very first internship site, they gave me a clock that has the liturgical calendar, like, 3-year cycle thing on it. So if you wonder if I ever talked about it a little bit with them, I clearly did, because they gave me a going away gift that was...
I envision this looking like kind of like the Weasley's clock or whatever, that it's not like hours of the day, but it's like mortal peril coming, like traveling. It's just like, this is more of the situation of what that kind of clock would look like.
I think the people at Lord of Life will be very happy with that Harry Potter reference to their gift, so...
The Gospel of John.
Yeah. So, you asked me this, and you're the host, but I'm going to ask you anyways. What's the thing about this text that sticks out for you when you first read it? Because I think it's the same as mine.
Yeah, so, like much of the Gospel of John, which we've already alluded to a little bit, it's the gospel that if someone is going to take something out of context and use it for their own means to say whatever they want, most of the time negative, it's out of a gospel. It's going to come out of the Gospel of John. And we talked about this briefly last week and 2 weeks ago, but talk about proof texting. Proof texting is when you take the Bible and make it say what you want it to mean. It's when you take a purpose and you impose it. So you, as Pastor Kevin said, like you and your 21st century view are behind the text. And if you take it and you put it upon the biblical text that's 2,000 years old, and then you're grasping these pieces to, say, make an argument, right? Like, so people that use the Bible like a lawyer, right? Like a legal argument. And there's a lot of preaching that's very, very based on that. Is basically they're like a prosecutor giving an opening statement, and they're parsing these pieces of law to make their point, right? And so they take them out of the context in which they exist. And if there's a place in the Gospels that's going to happen, if there's a place we take Jesus out of Jesus's context, the most, it's within the Gospel of John. And I'll say just personally for me is like, I've also been through that time in my life where like, the Bible wasn't a book of love. Like, it was a weapon. It was a thing that I didn't want to touch and that I didn't want to go near because it felt like the way that people used it was actually hurting my relationship with God, was hurting how I had experienced Christ in my life, or, in the Spirit manifested. Like, it felt like the opposite of what I had experienced. And for people that are listening that are like, how is that? Like, when did you have this period, AJ? Like, you went from working at the Lutheran Student Center to like being a Yagam to doing this, like working at church camps. Like, when did you, and the reason that I say this is like, actually all of those experiences and what I had experienced, of God led me to one thing. And then the way that the Bible was used was like totally the opposite of that. And so one of the reasons that this is important to me is for people out there that maybe have had that same experience or are struggling with reconciling what the Bible has to say with their experience of a loving God. Right. That they're not actually contradictory. It's just a matter of like letting the Bible speak for itself and not using the Bible as like a legal argument.
Right. Yeah.
So like if you were to take this out of its context and you hear you're the branches, if you're not good enough, you have to be thrown in. If you don't produce enough fruit,
you're gonna go in the fire.
You're gonna go in the fire and burn in a fiery hell, right? Like that's if you take this out of its context, like that's a thing that you can interpret.
And that's how I understood it for a majority of my life. Or that's how I understood most of the Gospels, was every time that that is said by Jesus or by anyone else, that's what it is like we're talking just about this literal place of fire and brimstone in which if I'm not good enough, I'm going to go and burn. And that has everything to do with whether or not I, depending on your understanding, play cards or drink or, murder people. That all of those things are notches that send me to the fiery place, that cause God to trim me off of the branch and burn me up. Instead of that this is about a relationship
Yeah.
Right? So the larger context is that this particular part is Jesus talking about being in a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And when you're in a relationship, the vine grower needs the vines just as much as the vines need the vine grower. Because without the vine grower, like, doing the pruning, the vines can't produce well and can't be, abundant. And they're going to, like, I'm no botanist, but, they're going to grow and stuff inside's going to die and there's all that technical stuff. But, like, they're also not going to produce well, so the vine grower isn't going to have any use for them then either.
Yeah. So again, recognizing that, like, so they're sitting at this table, and, like, Jesus knows that he's about to die, and so he's giving them this whole spiel. So for churches, liturgical churches, churches that follow the Revised Common Lectionary or that hold to liturgical holidays, so, like, in Holy Week, if your church went to church on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, and Sunday, like, maybe not the Saturday night, but the other 3 days, definitely, for sure, you're a liturgical church. Anyway, so on Thursday, so Maundy Thursday, I actually preached this year on Maundy Thursday about what the word Maundy means, because so when I was little, maybe older than I care to admit, I thought that
5 years ago.
Exactly, 5 years ago. No, but growing up, I thought I didn't understand the word Monday. I thought I was hearing Monday, Thursday, because Thursday was the first day of the week, and we were going to go to church every single day for the rest of the week.
This makes total sense.
I thought so too.
Right?
Thank
you.
I
always thought about the
starting Thursday. You go to church every single day, right?
I always
like
thought about is it the Mamas and Papas song? Monday. Anyways.
Yeah.
When you say that.
So the word Monday is actually from, like, the Latin roots mandatum. Mandate, commandment, that the entire thing that we're recognizing, that we're celebrating, that we are making a point to recognize every single year right before Jesus dies, is that Jesus gives them a new commandment, a new mandate. And it comes out of this part of the Gospel of John, that in chapter 13 he washed their feet. And then he gives them this mandate, which he continues to talk about all the way up until they leave to go to the garden. This is what it's a part that we're talking about here with the vines and the branches. He's trying to get them to understand what this mandate is. And if we read a little bit farther in the chapter of 15,
they didn't get it the first time,
or the second, or the third time, or how many, this is a joke amongst pastors, or at least people that went to our seminary, is that they're the disciples, that they don't seem to understand anything, and that's why Jesus has to explain it over and over and over and over again.
Well, just like us, I think that's the thing I love about looking at the text that way, about keep seeing how many times Jesus says stuff and then being like, he said this already, like, you should know the answer to this.
Yeah.
And then is that like, oh right, I do that too. I can be that hard-headed that I just don't hear it.
Yeah.
I have to be told things over and over again.
What's also easy for us to, like, take that perspective 2,000 years later as, like, a bird's eye view looking in. Yeah. I've said that to my congregation too. I said, Jesus says that to them, and they may get tired of hearing it the same way you get tired of me saying it to you. That Jesus says this. Right. This is the new commandment. That you should love one another as I have loved you. In this big, long speech that he gives to the disciples while they're sitting at the Last Supper, according to the Gospel of John, he says this twice. That he says it in chapter 13, and then explains it and says it again here in chapter 15, verses 12. That this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. That there is no greater love than this.
Right. When we focus, like, my ear goes to that, like, trimming, like we were just talking about. But when we focus only on the trimming, whether for good or for bad, right? Yeah. Either whether we're trying to, like, explain it away or
and you can
use it.
Maybe share about this, but that's sort of like a little bit of indoctrination as to how you're what you've been told is how to perceive. Like, right? So, like,
Right.
from a Lutheran perspective, grace, 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 grace. Like, that's always the point. But from a different...
a theological point of view. Yeah.
Right.
Right. And I think... I will say that there is value for all the ways in which we understand God. Also, there are plenty of hurtful and terrible ways in which we take the words of the Bible and make them not what God intends, and not not what is being there. And so but when we linger too much on one part and don't hear the love, right? Then we're being like the disciples. We're missing that. Like, this is what Jesus has is saying for this entire discourse.
Yeah.
Is, I love you. I'm giving you this commandment to love others.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I'm doing as much as, like, bending down and washing your dirty, terrible first century, like
super dirty, like they walk around barefoot
street,
feet.
like with like straps and leather on your feet, to prove to you who you need to be to other people. This is an example. This is my mandate, like you said. And if we just like only focus on, well, Jesus says that God's gonna like trim us away if we're not good enough, if we don't produce fruit.
Yeah.
And so that's my job, is to produce fruit. We're missing the point.
Well, the whole point of the whole thing, right? Like, I could, and by argue, I mean, like, I firmly believe that everything that Jesus
also
has ever...
that you would argue, is what...
I would, I could, I do, like, yes, all of the above. And that I'm going to.
Right.
Actually, that everything that Jesus has ever said and done, all of it together, adds up to and compiles to this one sentence, right? Like, this love.
Yeah.
That's what the whole thing has been.
Yeah. You hear... Like, so often in John we hear abide all the time, right? Mm-hmm. And abide is from the Greek. The Greek is meno, but it's about, like, it's not just abiding. Like, it's like we I don't know how we imagine abiding, but it's like being with, right? It's like being. It's sort of intimate, and like it's about
basking.
Yeah, it's about being together. It's not about like, oh, here I am, like, abiding with my dog on the couch next to me while we talk, or like we're in the same room.
No, it's an intimate thing.
Right. It's about being together, and like, if you're a vine, then you're like, everything is connected, right? And you were saying that before we started, is this idea that, like, the vines are all connected and you can't, like, pull one out from another.
Yeah, so the imagery of vineyard, so this actually would have been a pretty, like, common imagery for them to hear. There's just, I mean, there's a lot of them in the region there. But so this is normal to them, and we actually have in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew Bible, there's actually a lot of vine imagery, but all of this vine imagery actually is like, it's about all of Israel, like Israel as a nation, Israel as a people, not Israel as a physical landmass, right? But Israel as a group of people. This is the vine, and so this is the first time that we hear. That audience would have heard, it's not you as the people, but that Jesus, this one, that like this is what the vine itself is. So the thing here that's important to note about the way Jesus is talking about being the vine and that you are the branches, of understanding that everywhere where you hear, it's a you all, a y'all. It's one of those hard things of English translations, is like, our word for you and you is the same, right? And so, like, we miss those places. Like, it's not specific. It is you all. And that's important to recognize, that, like, Jesus isn't saying you need to be perfect. You need to bear fruit. You need to do this or you will be burnt. That's not at all, like, it's understanding everything in a context of a community. And so part of that too is understanding, like, if you've ever seen a grapevine, right? Like, grapevines are like a tangly mess, right? Like, they're like... There's no audible way for me to show you what my arms are doing right now for what a grapevine looks like, right? Like, there's no pulling them apart. It's kind of like... imagine you have a bag of chords, you know, say for musical people, like if you just like throw all your chords in the bag and then you pull them out and you just have this like nest and mesh and like you can't parse out, like that's essentially what a grapevine looks like. And so the idea with like thinking about it as a you all, right, is like there's no way to parse out individuality here. Yeah. Like, this is not about individual Christian piety. This is about a relationship as a communal mess.
Yeah. That we're all, like...
That we're all in this communal
all
mess.
This together, yeah.
Attached to Jesus.
Yeah. Like, there's nothing about a relationship with God that isn't about the community.
Right.
Right, that even when
well, talk more about that, because that actually is not a thing that maybe everyone's heard in their particular church context.
Right, well, anytime, even if we're talking about our relationship with God, right, our personal one-on-one relationship, it is still about God loving us and us loving others.
It's always about
right?
community.
It's always about community, right?
Well, I would even argue, even in, like... not just about love, but like in that negative aspect of sin, I actually think that like our communal sins are more of a problem, or like more...
Or, I mean, the fact that at any point
like
we think that we can exist outside of God's care for us. Right. I think that...
Well, okay, so what I'm thinking of is like corporate sins, structural sins, like the things that like...
Right, not the like...
God is not giving a shit whether you went and played poker on Friday night. Like, that's... Right. What's more maybe important is like what is happening to indigenous persons because of a capitalist society and how much that has changed the face of the earth.
Right.
Maybe those are sins, part of a greater structure as a community.
Right, but our sins aren't these individual things. Correct. I think it's like it doesn't matter. We can name them.
There's no accounting system
it doesn't
that's
matter
being...
if you're okay with playing cards and you're okay with having a beer while you're recording a podcast, then you're fine. Like those might not be the things, but we all tend to individualize sin instead of understanding that sin is our thought that we can do things outside of God.
Right.
Right? And so when we do that, we create these structural situations that you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. We create societies built on the fact that we are trying to be the best individual people, right? And only look out for ourselves.
Yes.
And anytime we do that, we miss the community.
So that brings us to a particular way that you could look at verse 7 here in our gospel lesson. If you abide in me, and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. This is the magic genie text. Again, so if you're reading it out of its context and the larger story that we've been talking about, and you just hear the English, the you, and you hear this you individual, you there, do this. You know, you read my Bible, you take in my word, you do good things, I'll give you whatever you want. Right? This like magic genie approach that all of a sudden praying to God is like
about our own needs.
In rubbing the magic lamp, right?
It's about our own sustenance. It's about how we individually, how John and who John immediately cares about are going to get through life, and not about how the community that John is connected to, which is vast, right? I mean, it's larger than my neighborhood, it's larger than my city, it's larger than the churches that I serve in. Mm-hmm. It's about our whole world, right? That like the love of God isn't individual for us. Instead, it is for all people, right? Yeah. It is for all of God's creation. And it extends, I think, I would say it extends outside of just human beings, but God has care for the entire creation.
Oh, for sure.
In a way.
Yeah, that we're a piece of that.
Yeah, and we're just like this one tiny little speck of vine, if we're gonna like beat this analogy from the text to death, like, right? And I had friends who made an attempt at having a vineyard. Right? They had a bunch of acreage and they were really into wine, and so they planted grapes, and a couple of seasons I helped them do, like, it was a super amateur operation. It wasn't terrible, but it was never became a this isn't a success story, and now they're like this.
You can't go visit this winery today?
You can't go visit this winery. You actually, I don't even know if the grapes are still growing there. They don't live there anymore. But the thing is that I sort of got to understand a little bit of, like, there's all these individual plants, but when they grow together, you don't know, like, a row of grapevines, or
you don't know which vine is
as a friend from that group of friends would say, wine trees. Like, as those wine trees grow, they don't grow like apple trees or peach trees, right? Like, where you have this is tree, and like if there could be something that could happen to this tree that could not affect the rest. They're all connected.
I'm always saying wine trees from this moment forward.
So,
that feels very Episcopalian to me.
But I think that, like, that's the whole thing, right? Love and community, and God cares about us. If you can get those things, right? We can actually talk about something different, right? Like you said, like I feel like
that, like, basic point Jesus was trying to make.
Yeah.
But we still don't get it. So, like, what do you do with that in the 21st century where, like, that still is a thing that, like, we're struggling with, is understanding that community. And I think part of that has to do with understanding, like, so if you read this from an individualist perspective, which I would argue is a privileged perspective to read that from.
And not probably the perspective that a first century person would have read.
No, not at all.
This text, the person that it was written to would not have understood individualism in the same way that we do.
No. That's they
would have understand. I mean, also they would have maybe read it in the original.
The, like, Greek, Enlightenment era individualism, pull yourself up by your bootstraps bullshit that we do. Like, that's a really, like, that is a over the course of time developed, and I would say even Americanized perspective of the way that we do life. And so we think about, like, I only have to care about what I do, what I say, what I think, what is good for me, what is good for, like, those, that is a perspective that we have today that didn't exist then, because nothing worked on an individual level. Right? Even most of the parts of the world, like, most places do not exist on that individual level. Yeah. Like, most places in this world, like, your whole family, and by your whole family, I mean, like, your brothers and sisters and their spouses and their children and your parents and, like, your nieces and nephews and their kids and what, like, you all still live together and you work together to do life. Like, that aspect of community, I think, is different than we in our North American, like, you turn 18, you move out of the house, you get your own apartment type lifestyle,
right?
And that everyone needs to support themselves and do that. Like, that lens that then we put on the Bible very much changes what the context would have meant.
Yeah, even when we are attempting to look at it in a way that is different, right? Even when we're trying to look at it with the lens of, like, Jesus isn't saying, like, you individually, I'm going to cut you off and throw you out.
Yeah.
But that, like, this is about the community and about the relationship that the community has with God. We still bring that baggage with us of not understanding the intertwinedness of community.
Yeah.
Right? Because, I mean, I still live, even though we live in the same neighborhood, right? I still live
here
6 blocks from you, right? Like, I mean, we still have we still have separate ways in which we live.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not the same sort of thing. And so it's really hard sometimes for us to, like, get past that.
Well, and to understand the level of community that they would have been living in.
Right.
Like, particularly also understanding that, by this point in time in Jesus' ministry, he had, like, a horde of nomads.
Yeah.
That was following him.
Yeah.
It wasn't just 12 dudes, right? Like, we like to think that the Bible
we
likes
talk about,
to...
right, yeah. One of the things I really love is, so because I serve 2 churches that are in the process they're partnered and they're in the process of maybe being more than partnered, is that the Church of the Holy Apostles, which is the Episcopal side of our congregation, they're in their sanctuary, their original sanctuary. There are stained glass windows for all the apostles, and there is a window for Mary Magdalene, and
that makes me happy.
I really love that there's not just like
the 12 dudes,
right? I mean, and all the other thing I like about them is they're all images, and they're not like they're the symbols for those disciples. They're not like a picture of a white dude.
Mm-hmm.
But I love that there is a subtle but really wonderful acknowledgement that, like, the Holy Apostles weren't just these like what we understand as these 12 dudes who sat at a table looking away from each other to have this big dinner, right? But that they were like, it was a much larger community than just those 12 people.
Much larger. Well, I mean, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole today about all the times where men get acknowledged and women never seem to as much. I think about particularly think about the feeding of the 5,000. The feeding of 5,000 men and then the women and children.
Right.
Like, Jesus really fed about 15 to 20,000 people, which really, to me, is like, what they're doing is just stifling Jesus' miracle, actually. Think about it. Like, if I don't know, if I were Jesus, I'm going to go down this path. If I were Jesus...
Would that make you mad?
And I'm looking back, and I'm thinking, and they're like, 5,000 dudes and then women... Come on! I fed like 20,000 people that day! Come on!
Let's just, like, give credit where credit's due.
Exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I also feel that way about the horde of people, aka disciples,
right,
that were following him.
Right, and the only ones that were left, I mean, now we're not even talking about the text, so I'm just going to say this, and the only ones that were left at the end were women, right? And the disciple that Jesus loved.
Yeah.
Right? But the only ones that were left were women.
The hair flip disciple.
So,
the disciple that Jesus loved.
Right. And this is where I will say...
Oh, yeah, you should for sure.
Yeah, that the Reverend Dr. Caroline Lewis really, like, sort of destroyed my world in a really excellent way is that, that disciple that Jesus loved, the literary context is that is you, right? That any time that we hear that term in John, the author is referring to you, which changes how you look at it, right? Instead of the... I think there's, like I said, there's place for all of these things. And I love when you pretend to throw your hair back, so I'm here for that.
Well, you're growing your hair out,
right?
so...
Well, yeah, we'll see how long that lasts. The fact, though, that, like, that is... You are in that place, right? That in all of those things, when Jesus looks down from the cross, and the only people that are left are women, right? And Jesus looks at you and tells you those things. That was really like sort of aha moment for me.
It's powerful.
It made me not dislike John anymore. The book, the gospel,
Not yourself.
It's difficult because my name is John.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah. So love and live in community, and Jesus isn't isn't telling you to act right or else he's gonna like cut you off, but it's about a relationship. We probably could have just like said that in the beginning.
That's a fantastic summary. I appreciate it.
We just started with that, and then we didn't need the rest of the podcast.
Well, I don't know about that. But... anyways, well, that is it for this week. Look for us next Tuesday on Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday. And, of course, follow us on Facebook at Facebook.com/Shit They Don't Tell You on Sunday to stay up to date with things. And also subscribe to the podcast wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, so you can get new episodes. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, all the other podcast apps. You can subscribe to us there. And as always, share this with family and friends that you think really would love to journey with us and have these kinds of conversations about the Bible that could be a life-giving and new way to just journey with us.
And if you're listening to this simply because I posted it on my Facebook page or shared it with you because I'm on it, then like go back and listen to the others and subscribe, because Pastor AJ has things to say that are always consistently better than things I have to say. So.
Well, thank you. And I disagree, but the podcast is over, so we won't dive into that. But, thank you for your time, and take care, y'all. Hear from me next week.